Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christopher Asbridge. I am the host of the Arctic TechCast, and today we're talking about cybersecurity and being a product manager around that. I'm joined by some fabulous guests, but I'll let them introduce themselves. Tim, would you like to go first, please?
Sure, happy to. So I'm Tim Erlin. I'm currently the VP of Product at Wallarm. And I have a long history in product management from being a sales engineer, which is a good place to start for a product manager, to managing individual products, managing portfolios of products for Tripwire and security scorecards. So I'm really excited to be here for this conversation.
No, perfect. Thank you, Tim. Mike, I'll come to you next. Oh, I think Mike might have just frozen there for a second. Danwei, we'll move on to yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Danwei. I run product at Detectify. It's a Swedish cybersecurity company that helps OPSEC team keep their evolving attack surface secure. And I joined this company about 5-ish years ago as a product designer. So I always had one foot in the design field and one foot in the tech part. And that's the combo I bring into the product team at the moment. So that's me. And before this, I pursued a PhD. I worked at Microsoft. I studied software engineering. So a mix and a mess.
Okay, fabulous. Again, thank you for joining. I believe Mike might be having some connectivity issues. When he comes on, we'll get him to do an introduction. But moving forward, what we're going to talk about today is obviously working in the cybersecurity place and working sort of product management around this. So we came up with 3 questions that we're really going to dive into. And the first question we're going to go is how to balance multiple personas. Then we'll move on to how to make security product decisions. And then we'll finally finish with the AI and how AI is changing the product management game. That's what we're going to delve into today. With the audience tuning in, if you have any questions at all, feel free to throw them into the comment section. At the end of everyone's question, we'll put some time apart and dive into it. Okay. Not sure what's happened to Mike. He's not messaged me, but we'll just move on to the first question, and when he comes in, we'll just get him up to speed. Is that okay? So that way we'll start with your question, and it's talking about how to balance multiple personas. Can you just sort of delve into that a little bit more further for us?
Yeah, sure. So there's a method or framework called personas. Many of us are probably familiar with that. It's of creating some sort of a semi-fictional character to keep your desired user or your primary user in mind when you make product decisions. And personally, I've always had some sort of a love-hate relationship with personas, leaning more towards hate than love, unfortunately. And that's probably because I've never seen them work in the way they're supposed to work. First of all, it's super difficult to get them perfect. Even if they're not perfect, getting them to a state when they're useful is also hard. First, you need to find the right persons to interview. You have to do the actual user research to be able to identify goals, needs, pain points, and desires that your intended user have. And then you need to somehow make this extensive collection of data into something that is easily digestible. And you have to identify patterns and then create these personas that become these fictional characters. And most often they're a mashup of no one. They become this caricature of someone that doesn't even exist, or a combination of traits from different types of people. So yeah, it's more of an exercise in talking to actual customers and users. That's the way I see them being useful. And I've been part of creating personas. I did that when I first joined Detectify, but the purpose of doing that back then was mainly as a way to highlight that we need to talk to our customers. We have to create products not only based on our own understanding and our own expertise and knowledge, but more picking the brains of our users and potential users to understand what kind of challenges are they facing. And at that point, personas was what it resulted in. But I don't see that the use of personas being the main benefit of creating personas. That's my experience. So something that we are doing now at Detectify, we're using something called jobs to be done instead. So it doesn't have to be either personas or jobs to be done, but they're similar but different in a major way that I see it. So jobs to be done, I know that some people have said that people don't buy product, especially not SaaS-based product. They hire the product to do a job. So that's why it's called jobs to be done. So you're trying to identify what is our product or our service supposed to solve, what kind of problems and what kind of needs does it need to fulfill. So as you can see, there are similarities between personas needs and jobs to be done purpose needs, but the focus on jobs to be done highlights the outcome, the intended outcome, rather than features that usually personas focuses on. So we have made a switch of working with jobs to be done rather than working with personas here at Detectify. And that's something that I am much more comfortable with. And also it deals with the fact that several personas might have the same job to be done. And that's much easier to just focus on jobs to be done. And there are also many people that have similar titles, but they do completely different things, or they have different titles, but they do same thing. So just focusing on the job to be done sort of deletes all those those titles and those different tasks that different people at different companies might have, even though they're all our users. Yeah, that was a little bit broad strokes about personas and why I prefer jobs to be done, and the challenges with personas.
Okay, thank you, Danwei. Just for a second there, Mike, great to have you back. Just to fill you in, we sort of moved forward and went with Daniel's question talking about personas. I know you got the questions there, so just that's where we're up to. And when we come to your sort of answer, feel free to do your introduction. So again, give the audience some context. But Tim, I know you were there for most of Danwei's sort of evaluation of the question. What are your thoughts there about personas, and what's your experience around them?
I think I've had very similar experience. I guess I would say I've had some positive experience with personas when I was acquired into Tripwire. So when we were acquired, Tripwire had pretty well built personas at the time, and they were useful for ramping up quickly on who Tripwire was selling to, who was the target customer. And I found that the personas there were used cross functionally to align, which was helpful. But all of the downsides that Danwei was talking about were still true, right? The personas were never perfect. You could use a persona to have a general conversation, but it broke down very quickly. And I do think I'm also a fan of the jobs to be done framework as a means of focusing on the task that you're trying to help the user, help the customer accomplish. The jobs to be done often imply personas. Because someone has to be doing that job. It's not an abstract, concept of a user. It's a real person. I do find where I find personas useful, or I've found them useful in the past, is in communicating with sales. So sales, their job is about people. It's about connecting to the people in an account, understanding what their roles are, how they might influence a deal, all that kind of stuff. And so when you can connect with sales about different personas and you can sort of create that kind of a mapping, I have found it useful in that way. And to be honest, I think sales is going to create personas anyway. They may not label them as personas. They may use more sales-oriented terms like the economic buyer. That's a type of persona, really. So you're going to deal with them in one way or another when you're sort of engaging with sales around product too.
Yeah, I agree. We're also we're bringing the old personas back to life because of sales, so they know who to target and who to talk to. But we're sort of saying that, okay, this is the purpose is for salespeople to find the right person, the right buyer, or the right decision maker. But when we do product decision, we look at the jobs to be done for those personas. So you're right; they are very interconnected. Absolutely.
And your point about titles in cybersecurity is really important. I find it really challenging to target specific titles as personas because they vary so much. It's almost like product managers. The jobs that people are doing in cybersecurity have only a vague alignment with the title that they actually have. And you could even just look at CISOs as an example, right? Someone can be a CISO and their role might be vastly different, might be very business oriented, might be very technical. It can be a challenge.
Yeah, I'll drop in there now. I'll introduce myself in a bit, but yeah, we're very similar. So like our persona based, we have proto personas there, sort of living ones, constantly being added to, informed by our data. I'm not sure if it's explicitly said yet, but the behavioral aspect is what drives most of the decisions we make around it, whether that's the jobs to be done model or the persona itself. It's really understanding what behaviors we're wanting them to do, or we think we're trying to get them to behave like. But yeah, the same with the roles. We had a similar challenge whereby the realities of different people's perceptions of what a persona is and isn't. I've had it in many organizations, the buyer persona versus the user persona, and obviously the crossover inherently between the two. And sometimes the competing challenges because of that. The buyer, how you position it to them, market it to them, may not be how you speak to them in the product, or the goals you want to surface or the features you want to surface to them in a particular way. So yeah, we use them. They're a lot great for alignment in technology, product UX engineering. But like you say, when we work with product marketing sales, we have sort of other personas that they're more aligned around for talking to those individuals. As well.
How do you both keep them up? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I would say you reminded me of one of the ways that personas was useful in the past for me, which was in creating a like an internal persona or a sales persona, in order to identify when we're building something specifically for sales, that actually there's no job to be done there other than demoing the product. And often that having that persona at least gives you the ability to explicitly make a decision. I would usually advocate for that decision being no, but explicitly make a decision of, are we going to build this dashboard or this feature that has no value to our customer, but is really only so that sales can do a better demo or a cooler demo. That was one persona use case that came to mind. Sorry, Danwei, what were you going to say?
No, I was just curious. How do you keep your personas or jobs to be done up to date? How often do you revisit, or who owns them, so to speak?
Yeah, so in our organization currently, my head of UX, Gary, work very closely with. They're sort of formal owner of the personas. We have a whole conversation of what you think a strategy is and what artifacts you need. One of the key artifacts for us is who we're building for. It's something we surface often. So we try and cross-reference it so they are living. So our teams are shaped around effectively the goals for a persona. We use the personas, and also effectively, whether you want to call them user stories or epics, we do try to refer to them more often for exactly the same reason Tim said. So we're more explicit who this is for, because you can't satisfy everybody. So we try where possible to say they're acknowledging it maybe doesn't do this job for this other person. Ideally, everything solves for everybody's problem, but I don't know about your business, but we're a two-tier. So we've got distributors, partners, we sell direct, we have end users. Some users are the buyers, some aren't. So we're constantly trying to satisfy all our balanced needs across all of those personas. So regularly surface them, using that active conversation, hoping the teams tie them into their own working agreements and goals. Some of the things we do.
Yeah, we've solved that problem at Wallarm by not currently using personas. That way we don't have to keep them up to date. As I said, I'm a fan of the jobs to be done framework, and that's what we're currently focusing on. I think in cybersecurity there's a sort of a market maturity curve, or I'm not sure if it's a curve, but shape, we'll say. Earlier stage market segments tend to be very technically focused, and the buyers tend to be more technical as well. And so with API security, which is where Wallarm is, there's largely a stage now where it's a much more technically focused market, and so there's less value. If you could connect API security to the business, right now the audience on the other end, on the customer side, they're much more focused on the technical capabilities. So jobs to be done is a better framework for us, because it's fairly task oriented right now, at least in that segment.
Yeah, we also use the jobs to be done framework for our core personas as well. Like you say, we've got activities we want to do. I think the difference in our core proposition, it sounds like from yours at the moment, is a lot of our organisations are SMEs in the UK, predominantly at the moment, and emerging to Europe. So time poor, skill poor, this isn't an industry they understand. So a lot of the things we're trying to do is make it really accessible for them, so the behavior really is an important thing for us, not just the technical aspect, what they're trying to do. That said, we serve MSPs as a primary method to deliver to SMEs, so they are obviously more technical by nature, so do have expectations around APIs, SOCs and other acronyms that maybe an SME would have no clue what they are.
Danwei, you said you're bringing the old personas back at Detectify. What are you changing anything to make sure it's effective as you sort of resurface them?
Yeah, I guess that was a crude way of describing it. We're also focusing on jobs to be done, and we have, I guess, two sort of abstract level of jobs to be done where we say that's where we really want to shine. So those are our main focus area. But what we're bringing back or try to bring life to is a more clear picture of who the commercial team should target. So yeah, we're not bringing back the old personas per se. We are looking at them and trying to gather evidence for the actual traits, and not just demographics, but also their behaviors and what kind of factors are important for them when they make a decisions, whether to buy a particular tool or not. So the approach we're taking now is trying to talk to potential users and our customers and try to create a couple of description that fit that. But it's super hard to talk to get people to share their time. That's my main challenge. I think I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like in this particular industry, people are more guarded, and more protective of their time, which they should be. And especially, it's hard to get to be a fly on the wall, for example. I worked in other kinds of industries where it's easy to just tag along someone for a whole day and just to observe and listen in. And people in the security are not a big fan of that, of course. And the problem is that, when someone say what they do or what they need, it's usually not exactly what they actually do and what they actually need if you observe them in day to day. So that's a big challenge, I think, in creating personas in the security space.
It is, and you've touched on the challenge of, talking to customers versus talking to prospects, because it's much easier, even though it's still difficult. It's easier to get a customer's time, and you can end up, if you only talk to customers, in this sort of self-reinforcing loop of building things that only service your existing customer base. Prospects have no reason to talk to you and spend time with you, but they're the ones whose perspective you really want, right? Because they're the customers who, the future customers, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's like reaching out to a random stranger on LinkedIn and saying, "Hey, could I spend the day with you?" No.
We're actually doing that.
Well, if you figure out how to make that work, let me know.
Okay. What we'll do then, sounds like we've got a nice discussion there, talking about personas and how important it is and the pros and cons. What we'll do then, we'll move on to sort of Mike's question. But before we do that, Mike, it's a little bit overdue, but do you mind if you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Hayden. Sorry, there was a big coincidence between a BT OpenReach van going by and my internet not working. Other infrastructure providers are available, but I don't know. Sorry about that. Yeah, Mike Doherty, VP of Product at CyberSmart. I've been here coming up to sort of just over a year and a half. As an organisation, our mission is really to protect SMEs globally in an accessible way. Like, it's a very complicated technical space we're into. Some people, to others, it's voodoo. Some people actually who press the experts even admit they're finding it hard to keep up to date with the evolving nature of it. So I've been here about a year and a half, guiding basically product and UX, working with my engineering peers to actually make enterprise best-in-class software accessible to SMEs, whether it's via the channel MSPs and resellers or directly to the customers themselves. Prior to that, about 8 to 10 years in product. Originally started more in the sort of coaching aspect, like agile coaching. So a lot of forming teams and actually building product, realizing this is product management. So thank you to the CEO and the CPO at the time that said you should probably be in product, because that was the first step of formalizing my career in product. Been very fortunate to build products at an enterprise level used by up to 100,000 users in workforce management. Built a machine learning forecasting model, building data science teams, going via an organization building workforce planning, strategic workforce planning, so an adjacent space. And then cybersecurity, to me, candidly, is a very, very different space. But from a product management point of view, because that's the important topic here in cybersecurity, all of these domains are so complicated for me. Like, there's a complex nature to them that I find really interesting. And in every organization I've been in, it's how you translate that in a really accessible way to a layperson, end user, and employee to help them in their job. And that's been the theme through all the things I've been building or helping build. That's a bit of an intro.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. And the question that sort of you've picked out is how do you make cyber let's start again. How do you make security product decisions? Can you sort of divulge a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all started coming up then, like the nature of our roles. I think when Tim was saying, well, deciding who to build for, is this explicitly for a persona that we acknowledge has some value, but maybe not other value? And it's frequently like the reason I wanted to talk about it is it's hard anyway in product management. And it's even harder when you've got these multiple competing personas that some are technical, some aren't. And I think anyone in the B2B space can sort of empathize with this, really. So the aspects I wanted to talk about and get input on was, one, is it really a prioritization problem? Hopefully they won't mind. When I interviewed for this role, I was doing a prioritization task. We got a priority problem. It actually wasn't. It was actually a sort of more of a strategy problem. It was, I don't think there was a complete alignment on what we're doing and who we're doing it for. So sometimes this priority problem can look like it's I can't do X or Y or A, B or C. And the reality is we don't know why we're doing X or Y or why we should do A, B or C. So I think the first thing I'd say is we make sure we have a clear strategy from our mission down, which seems obvious, but it's not always time to do that. Some companies don't spend the real time aligning on that. And then everything we do, we have a product brief that actually importantly now has a commercial, behavioral and product hypothesis behind it. So before we go in there, it's creating that alignment. And then the hardest bit for me is balancing, I think everyone talks about the product operating model, innovation, predictability. The constant tug I have is we need to be predictable for the business to prioritize something of value, but we also want to innovate and we really want to deeply understand the user. We really want to understand the market and prospects. So things we're doing there, we try and give ourselves space. We take those big bets. But I think I said it on the last question. It has to come from a point of view of the user behavior is really what we're trying to solve for. Because really for me, I think when Gary, my head of UX, what we hear me say is good UX could be no UX, but also good UX is commercial. It's not a nice to have anymore for us because we're trying to shift those behaviors. So I dread to think how many competitors we all have in our spaces in each individual subsection of cybersecurity, network, cloud, go on. But for us, we believe it drives retention. We believe it drives NRR. We believe it drives upsell. So we're constantly looking for ways of embedding more improvement in our work. So you've got the meta decision of should we build this thing in a security space, but more important than ever, we're trying to get the behaviors that we want to do driving our decision making, because that's the outcome we actually want. Yes, we want to make money, but we want people to have a better security posture. That's what we're here for. Especially for me, the SMEs, that is really hard to do. So, and then again, I say about the SMEs, but we have to do it through the partner lens. So how do we balance that decision making on the MSPs, resellers? We have to look at their drivers. They want speed to value. They want a lower cost to serve. They want to get revenue from their bundling. But we want to make sure the SME at the end also has a good experience and also is secure after it, because that's what we're trying to do here. So it's just a few of the aspects we consider from strategy down, some of the artifacts we use, crosses over the personas, and some of the alignment we make to make our decisions. I'm really interested in some of the aspects of Danwei, Tim. Does any of that resonate with you? Like either how you think of strategy down to priority or getting alignment around it, or maybe the behavioral side of it?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you started was that we're talking about product management, but I've always felt like product management is sort of poorly defined. It's, depending on what company you go to, it can be many things, but it's just, it's sort of I can't think of the right analogy. It's the middle and there are other pieces that need to be in place. To your point, Mike, you can't really prioritize effectively if you don't have a strategy. And you can't really prioritize effectively if you can't measure outcomes. And so for me, strategy is definitely a challenge. Measuring outcomes in product management is one of those things that I've always found sort of a fascinating problem, because ultimately we all want to measure outcomes based on revenue produced, but it's a lagging indicator. Right? It takes, if you have a 6-month sales cycle and you build a new feature, it's going to take you a year before you've realized the revenue from that feature. And if you're a product manager waiting a year to find out if it was a good decision, you're not going to be there anymore. That doesn't work. And so I think that's a really interesting challenge to sort of hook on to the either end of product management, those pieces that really matter for prioritization.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, and that's for us why we're trying to make sure we get that hypothesis early. So we should have a behavioral hypothesis, which should give us a metric, and a commercial one, which gives us, again, not always revenue, ideally, that we can measure as soon as we start doing it. I'm not saying we're perfect. We're not this utopian org that does this end to end in every feature, but we're trying to do it more than ever for exactly that reason. Are these the right bets? We can only make a finite number of bets, can't we? So.
Yeah. What measurements what metrics can you choose that are closer to, sort of the decision in order to validate that hypothesis? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I've always thought before going more into product that design was a very abstract area to work in. But I gotta say, product management is even more abstract, because in design you at least have some flows or UI, and you can measure the clicks or the people's instant reaction. But yeah, I agree, it's super hard to find metrics that can give you an early indicator. Okay, is this an experiment worth iterating on, or should we just scrap it and move on to the next bet potential that could make a bigger impact? We haven't found the perfect way either yet, but we're approaching this as an experiment as well. So it's like a meta thing, trying to figure out what is it that can give us those early indicators.
And how do you ensure? I mean, it's not even really the sort of I want to say the sunk cost problem, right? How do you ensure that hypotheses that have either sort of mediocre results or poor results are actually abandoned? Because I find that to be a challenge, that people, once they start working on something, they want to keep working on it. It's sort of a feature inertia, if you will. It's
it
really hard
becomes
to
your
say,
baby.
actually, we're not going to build that. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants your baby. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a thing that designers, at least good designers, are taught very early on. So don't get attached to your sketches, and you do that by creating lots of sketches and show them early on, so you don't work for too long before you get some feedback from other people. And I think that's the same thing with the product. We have to try to ship things very crudely and get initial feedback super fast, so we don't get too attached to something that we're building for months before we get the first feedback, and then we get attached to, oh wait, they didn't understand it because of this and this, we can make it better. But no, we should probably have thought of something else much earlier. I think it's about creating early sketches and showing that as early as possible in prototype format. But it's hard. It's super hard.
It's hard. I was going to say, I think we've launched maybe 5 products in the past 6 months or so, brand new products or reimagined products. We've killed one. Candidly, I think it helped.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. I think we did it in the context of we went in our eyes open, and this might not be the right thing. It was leveraging value we have already, so it was a good test. There's still, what I'd say is there's still something in that space we know we want to do, because we've got a lot of validation. Maybe our approach might have been wrong, or the thing we did was wrong. So we still know there's something there we have to do, but our approach was wrong for that time, and that's okay. It was a minimum. I think the fact it was less of an investment than maybe a whole year of development may have helped. Like, it's like the sunk cost. Like, you're there for a team, it must work. We've been doing this for a year. Like, I actually worked or consulted for an organization that within a year they had a product, a lot of money burnt, and no users. So they probably didn't have the right gates early on. So I'm a bit more sensitive to it now, like seeing that from another company's point of view. So I'm interested in what sort of gates do you have? And I hate the idea of formal stage gates, but like, what is enough governance for you and security to say this is the right thing to move forward with? Like, obviously, we have discovery, we have delivery, we have some sort of level of strategic oversight. But when is enough, and when is too much, maybe? If you've got any examples in your companies of how you frame where that decision sits, even, is it with you? Is it with someone else?
I think that's a really tough question, because it's
Yeah.
not, there's no right answer. It varies depending on the organization. And this is one of the things that I think about when we build product for customers, or when we talk to customers about using the product. Like, it's important to understand how the organization gets work done, because if you're building a cybersecurity product that, say, it finds vulnerabilities, just take a generic use case. Every organization is going to have a different way of dealing with those vulnerabilities. The job to be done isn't finding vulnerabilities, it's fixing them or mitigating them. But in some organizations, the way that work gets done is by opening a ticket and going through very defined stages to process that ticket. In some organizations, the way to get work done is by raising an alarm for the highest priority thing, and sending it to the CEO. Like, there are organizations that are process oriented, people oriented, technology oriented, and that's true for us as well. So when we talk about the development process and gates, you have to look at the organization you're in. Is it a very formal organization? If you set up formal gates in the process, is that going to work, or is it just going to fall apart because that's not the organization you work for? And I think for Wallarm today, as a startup in API security, we're very velocity focused, right? We want to build things and put them in market as quickly as possible, and that's the market we're in. And so having a formal gates at each stage of the process, it doesn't fit for us. But I've worked at companies where that was absolutely the way to do it, and it was very effective because that was the type of company that it was. So I don't think there's one right answer.
And just out of interest, like, when we think of, like, specifically for security, you use about vulnerability. So do you have any teams that are focused more on the problem? So, for example, we've built a new product or around mean time to patch. So we know from our efficacy data that the median is around 30 days on devices. Our top quartile of partners is probably less than 2 weeks, 14 days, which massively outperforms the industry. That wasn't necessarily a conscious choice at the time, but now we're saying consciously, do we want to spend effort and time making that mean time to reaction reduction better, for example? And we're going to go and solve that. Do you have any teams that are solved around security metrics and actually focusing their priorities around that? Have you had any experience with that, or actually working on a specific security metric?
Not here, but I have in the past. And the conclusion I came to is that there's a point of diminishing returns where the tool can no longer improve the whatever the metric is, mean time to patch, any further, because it's a process, it's a company, organizational process issue, right? So if you say it's, you've gotten it down to 2 weeks for your top quartile of partners, my question is, would they be at that 2 week mark regardless of the tool they're using? Because it's really just that they're an efficient organization at getting that particular type of work done. And I can't solve those process problems with a tool.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, we're not down in those particular smaller details. We're looking at the larger jobs to be done and see, okay, what kind of bigger impact could we help in that, rather than trying to push a couple of numbers back and forth. At least that's where we are right now. But we also are a quite small company, so we don't have rigorous processes or gates in place to really decide whether to move forward with something or not. It's a lot of quick decisions depending on what we hear and the reactions we see at the moment. But we have a couple of things that we try to keep in mind to make sure that we sort of compare the different kinds of initiatives against each other in similar ways. So what are the desired outcome, and how fast could we potentially get to that? And we want to be able to get to that within a month's kind of work or a month's kind of effect. If it's longer than that, we should probably prioritize something else at the moment, because the industry is moving so fast and we have to keep up in a fast pace at the moment. So that's the kind of mindset we have right now. So we're listing desired outcome, and we want to be able to measure those effects within a very limited time in order for us to prioritize. And if that doesn't happen, then we need to switch to something else.
That's great. Yeah, we've got a similar concept at the moment. Like, our cycles are about 6 weeks. if we can't have an impact in 6 weeks, do we really want to do it? The answer might still be yes, but it's a very conscious decision to invest more than 6 weeks effort into something in one team. So yeah, similar thing. Obviously, a lot of things break down smaller than that, but that's a sort of leading indicator at the moment. If it takes more than 6 weeks, do we really think it's worth investing in?
Mike, one of the questions that
Especially
you were touching on there, I think, which was interesting, is how do you measure if a security product is working? Because you were talking about specific metrics, which is if those metrics exist for your product in the market, then there's a clear way to say, look, now the product's working, now it's not. These products perform better than others, that kind of thing. But I think it's a challenging question in a lot of ways. Security classically, security has an ROI proposition a bit like insurance, right? You put things in place so that bad things don't happen. But we don't do a particularly good job of measuring the probability of bad things happening, and cyber insurance would be a sort of the
Well, I was going to say it's something we actually offer. Like, I know we're not intrinsically linked to our organizations in this conversation, but yeah, it's something we have. Obviously, protecting SMEs. We don't want things to go wrong. Anyone who's in the UK has seen some very big things go wrong in retailers in the past few weeks. Not being able to get their shopping or no orders, and they're like large organizations. But the smaller ones, we do offer that insurance because things inherently, if they do go wrong, you need that support from day one. So yeah, like the metrics that we were talking about, the classic security ones, it's easy to go out and I think it helps the story, because I think the question at the start was there are some sort of box checkers on. I need to make sure it can do this thing, otherwise I'm not going to buy it. Like, it's all well and good me saying about the behavioral aspects, it's going to improve your security posture. They still need some hard facts. So we're very fortunate that we know people engage with our policies, improve their security stance. We know that we get really strong uptake on security training, but we also know after 6 weeks it drops off. So what are we doing about that? Because that's a long-term retention thing we need to worry about. So I think, the priority in decision making, the inputs, we've got a lot of metrics, whether that's behavioral metrics or security-based metrics. But yeah, if it was as easy as going to the market saying, I've got the best product with these 4 features and these 4 measures, I'm sure it'll be a lot easier for everybody, but that's not how people buy.
No, true.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like we discussed quite a lot there, and a lot that goes on with the decision making within products. Of course, it does. What we'll then do, Tim, we'll move over to your question, which is about AI. I know everyone's jumping on the bandwagon, but it can be quite interesting to see how much AI can change like the product management itself and the decisions around that as well. But I'll let you dive into that a bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting topic because we're seeing sort of obviously at least a lot of hype, but I think also a lot of usage of generative AI. And I'll draw that distinction for the people who are a little pedantic like me. For product managers in cybersecurity, we've been pushed to put AI in product for years. But we're talking about now generative AI, which sort of brings a different lens to the question. And I've seen conversations about how generative AI is going to replace product managers. I've seen sort of counter conversations about how it can't. I don't think there's any doubt that there are going to be tools and capabilities, and probably are today, that will change the job. So I thought it would be worthwhile to talk about how that change is likely going to occur, how it's already changed, how we're using generative AI today in our day-to-day jobs or not. And what we would maybe even like to see as innovations, down the road. So, I would start with sort of maybe the question of like how are you using generative AI today in the product management roles that you have?
I think it's super exciting first to start off with, and I feel like I missed out on the revolution of the internet. So I'm happy to hopefully be part of this kind of revolution. I'm super excited to see where this will take us, because I think its capability surpasses the damage it can make. And I don't think the fun part of our jobs will be diminished or taken away by AI. I feel more like the boring, the mundane, the repetitive parts of our jobs that are not why we are working with product. Those things AI can support us with, so we can actually have more time to do the fun things. And I know that we're using AI for simple things like summarizing notes, analyzing lots of data that we might have collected in various formats, transcribing, of course, customer interviews, highlighting, those simple things. But it's also used to as a sparring partner, I would say. It sort of feels like it's a smart, and it has access to all the information, sort of. And what I like is that it never gets tired. It has infinite patience, so you can sort of ask it whenever, however, and in different ways to get things that is useful to you. Now I'm being super vague, but I don't know how much detail I want to go into in the specifics. But it's a great sparring partner, both to get ideas and refine things. But since we also work in the security domain, right now we don't use any kind of customer data in relation to AI. So that's a big no for now, unless things change and we do something internally, which is not completely out of the question for us. But we would never use any third-party AI tool or something like that for customer data because of the industry we work in. So that's, but to make our own day-to-day work more efficient, absolutely.
Well, so I think you fall clearly on the side of the pro AI. It's gonna AI is gonna do my dishes and laundry for me, so I can spend my time making art or whatever the right analogy is. Not that it's going to replace the product manager, and I think I tend to believe that that's the case as well. But I do think that if your job, as I said earlier, product management is this huge spectrum from strategy to prioritizing Jira tickets. I think if you're working at that end of managing Jira backlogs, that piece of the job, which maybe there are some people who love that, but that's what I would call the tedious part of the job. Hopefully, that the laundry and dishes of product management do become easier to do. Those tedious tasks do become easier to do. Spending hours pouring through notes that you've taken instead of having them summarized. I'm happy to get rid of some of those jobs. But to me, those are fairly generic tasks. Are there specific product management tasks that you're using generative AI for today? Or are we not quite there yet? Is it still pretty generic use cases?
They may be generic, but we're definitely using them. So we found it has definitely accelerated our discovery and delivery. So like the examples you gave, we're definitely synthesizing our feedback quicker. We're definitely able to do it on a bigger scale. Like tooling, or actually you're going to evaluate another tool. Don't know if we name tools or not, like 4.4, because they have a proposition that helps us maybe do that at a scale in a market we're not in. So we use it for that. We've used it to identify patterns in our ideation data. Like you imagine we get a lot of input, like frequently internally. And although this isn't necessarily proprietary customer data, like the ideas that we get, we are using that. Obviously, we don't use anything without clear consent, and we don't actually use anything in AI at the moment from the customer. Caveat there. That said, we're also quite good internally to be explicit when we do generate something. So our CEO is quite clear. He goes, I've run this through Quick Claude AI or whatever. Be aware of that. This summary is AI generated. So being very clear when we do use it, I think is something that is helpful. Not necessarily say if I ran it through, I'd get the exact same answer anyway. So we just want to be aware that when we've done that, so that's a consideration. The other thing we're actually using, we use a tool, PostHog. I don't know what you use for your user analytics. They've got Max AI as part of that. It makes it a little bit easier to interrogate. So for a layperson maybe who's not as familiar with product operations or insights, they can ask plain English questions. That's quite helpful. Again, it's more an enabler, probably. I'd sort of, So to your point, I don't think it's going to replace everything in one go. I know there's been a few CEOs written their thesis on this and what's going to happen. We've got developers internally that talk about it and use it, so it helps our delivery. And we use Copilot and other things. So it helps us with pace on certain aspects, but it's not a strategy. It's more of a fault multiplier. Like I still think that human judgment's needed. So in our roles, maybe bet sizing, market timing. That I don't know, is that a science or art anyway? But understanding the market, timing for something, whether you shouldn't do it, the feedback on it. Is it too early, too late? Constant challenge. Don't know if AI could solve that for us, and maybe if our core job is to really surface those unserved needs, can it do that yet? I'm not sure. It can give you ideas, but the idea is not the hard bit. It's the executing on it and actually delivering on that return and changing the behaviors is the hard bit. So I think summary, we use it. It has helped accelerate stuff. It's helped auto generate some things and where we know it is, but I don't think it's a replacement for necessary strategic thinking, getting a strategy, and more importantly, the soft side of our job, aligning people that we talked about at the start, like off the call, but people, the human bit, that's the hardest bit. Although with all AI, we wouldn't need to.
Well, we'll
talk
just
to
get rid of the
so.
people, right? No.
Yeah, all AI.
Yeah, you touched on something that I think is for me one of the biggest ways that I think generative AI is going to impact product management, change product management, and it's not about product management at all, which is the use of AI to generate code and the subsequent increase in velocity you get from development, and potentially the increase in problems and errors you get from development as well. So I was at the RSA conference last week. There was a breakfast panel that was talking about AI development, code development, and one of the panelists said that their CIO stated an objective by the end of the year they're going to have 50% of their code that they write is AI generated, and it just made me think about how much faster things can get to market. And Danwei, that goes to your point of like, if we can put things in market faster, we can test hypotheses more effectively, and that changes our ability. We don't have to spend so much time on some of the discovery pieces to validate a hypothesis because development is expensive. We can just say, just build it, just build this thing and do a prototype. Let's, find out if people like it.
Yeah, that's actually one thing. Yeah, that's actually one thing. One of our PMs, he actually used AI to build a prototype of something. He didn't have to ask a developer to help create that vision or an example. And that also helped communication, alignment internally. So it's definitely sped things up. And I know that there are tools where you can actually evaluate your concept by an AI instead of actual user. Now, I haven't tried it yet, but I know that there's something like that out there. I don't know how efficient that is, but yeah.
No, someone that has. So shout out to an old peer, John. He gave me this example. One of his product managers used VO by Vercel on a call with a customer to use their prompts and what they thought they were thinking of to create a visualization there and then on the call to say to them, is this what you're thinking? So again, it's not going to be the final code. It's not going to be the actual product, because we all know there's a lot more goes into a scalable enterprise product than that. But the fact that they're able to there and then get a visual, especially someone that's visual in their sort of way of thinking, to translate their ideas into the thing. We all know, like, you don't pick the first idea and solution as the thing, but it definitely accelerated that conversation with the customer and actually exposed them to other things. Maybe put a bit of bias in there, but it's another way to use the tool that maybe we wouldn't have access to before. Well, the whiteboard with a pen, but quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that'll make that kind of that falls to the side of AI is going to replace the product manager. This idea that you don't need a product manager anymore, you can just build the thing because it's so easy to build and put it in front of the customer, and then the customer can tell you, yes, we like it, well, we don't. The reason I don't think that's going to replace product management is because, to your point, Danwei, that you made earlier, the customers often ask for things that aren't really what they need, that don't actually solve the problem. And so you end up in this thing, I think we had it written down somewhere, this idea that like you could build the checklist of what the customer asked for and still end up with an unhappy customer who doesn't buy it, right? And AI actually seems like a great tool for doing exactly that, for building exactly what the customer asked for that they don't want.
But I have high hopes that there are some AI models that can imagine things. Yeah, I mean, we've seen AI creating art, creating music, and things like that. So maybe it will be like having a very smart colleague.
That gets to a very philosophical question, doesn't it?
I'm a musician. So
okay, let's put that aside. Let's
maybe
not
outside of product management. Maybe outside of product management. Yeah.
From my perspective with AI, speaking to a lot of CTOs, engineering leaders throughout, most people are using it as a tool. It's not going to replace anyone. It's just like a calculator, for example. At one point, people thought a calculator was this new crazy thing, and maths will be a thing of the past. But no, it's going to work out. It's just a thing that helps. It helps you. It's a tool that we use. Fully replacements, I think we're well far away from that. Because like Danwei was saying, and Mike was saying as well, is that you do need that human touch, and that makes everything so much better. Because nowadays, when you get an email through and you can tell it's AI, you can read the script it's coming through and think that's AI generated. It's quite obvious nowadays. Right, I think that takes us to the end of the podcast. Do any of you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Oh,
Put you on the spot there, haven't I?
I think it was a great conversation. Good topics. I really enjoyed it, actually. And, I think, Chris, I'd like to thank you for putting it together, because it was, whether there's an audience or not, it was an interesting conversation to have.
I'll ping the
I
numbers
agree.
over at the end of this. I think we've got quite a few people join, but no one's really commented, which is a quiet one. But I'll ping over the numbers at the end of the conversation. But Danwei, Mike, any other comments?
I just echo the thanks, like bringing us together. I think it's always nice to speak to your peers in product, even in the same industry, similar spaces, in different parts of the globe, same challenges, different challenges. Product management is, like you said at the start, it's not the same in any organization, not even remotely. Yet there's a lot of parallels and things we all learn from each other. So I think the focus on learning has been great, especially in our space, which again, very evolving rapidly. Trying to keep on top of that, and also product management principles is nice just to be able to emphasize and talk to other people about it and get some ideas. So yeah, hopefully some people on the call took something away from it as well, even if there are no comments.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks again.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said by Tim and you. I mean, I appreciate the dialogues, the conversation, and just like you already said, I mean, sometimes we get so focused on the day-to-day and the challenge we have, and to be able to air it and share it sometimes makes, it's nice to feel not alone. We're all sharing different kinds of focus, but we also share similar challenges despite working in different organizations, different countries, and things like that. So it's nice to have made this connection and have some dialogues, and hope to stay in touch. And if anyone in the audience or anyone watching later on, if anything we said made you think of something that you want to discuss with us, I'm happy to get a ping at least. So yeah.
Well, amazing. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining. And this is the Arctic TechCast. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys, watching on LinkedIn. And if you're listening on Spotify and YouTube, hello, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Other than that, have a great evening. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.